Question time. Welcome to a special episode of Storytime, where we'll answer questions from the community. I'm excited to be joined by Adri from our team today, who has collected questions from the community that we can answer. Hi, Adri.
Paul, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on the show. Now, let's dive in. Is it mandatory to have an image size of 828 by 1792 in the web story? Our images are getting cropped on different mobile devices when we use the recommended size.
Great question. This is not a requirement. This is probably a bug you found in our documentation. And in fact, you can use any kind of background image that you want as long as it's high quality and crisp. What you do have to watch out for is the cropping, which is actually just the nature of our responsiveness. So stories get displayed full screen on different viewports and different resolutions. So you need to ensure that the most important content is in the center of your background image or background video.
Now, let's move on with our next question from Fahim. So he says, I use Google Blogger to host my website. Can web stories be created for it?
So Blogger currently doesn't have native support for web stories, but it doesn't mean that you cannot create web stories if you're running on Blogger. You can still use a third-party tool like Make Stories or Newsroom AI or Visual Stories. If you want to do that, create those stories off Blogger and reference them in your blog post or include a screenshot and link to the story. So that might not be the same as doing it natively in Blogger, but you still have the possibility here.
The next question from Saijo is providing a roundup of key events every day like this digital marketing news considered to be a good format for web stories that might get featured in Google Discover?
So the great thing about web stories is that it's up to you what you create. They're on the open web, they're like a web page, and you can create whatever you want with it. Now, what gets featured in Discover and what doesn't get featured in Discover is something that I cannot disclose. However, I would encourage you to try with all sorts of different formats and different verticals to see what sticks best and what works best with Discover users.
This is from Lamp, and the question is what, who, and why?
Web stories. You modernize the web.
Great answer. Our next question is from Evan. How can small-time and indie bloggers make sure their written content gets displayed in Google Discover? Right now, it looks like only the biggest brands on the web are featured.
Well, the good news is that that's not actually true. If you look at Google Discover and the story integration today, you'll see a lot of small-time indie publishers out there. For instance, the stories from Foodaciously appear in Discover and many more from often one-person WordPress websites. I would encourage you to try produce high-quality content, and there's definitely no reason why you shouldn't appear.
What are your recommendations for covers for web stories? Sizing, images, text?
So great news, there's an episode coming about this topic next week, which is going to be all about SEO. What I will say though is that the most important thing to watch out for is burned-in text. So don't put your title of the story onto the cover, which might seem counterintuitive. But if you look at all of the stories in, let's say, the Discover carousel, then you'll see that the text is actually on top of the cover, which means that you would have it twice. Make sure you just use something that represents your story, that is a really nice, high-quality image, and make sure that it's enticing for your users.
Ben, what other platforms will web stories be built on outside of WordPress?
Well, the good news is that that's already the case. There are already a lot of third-party creation tools out there that are not on WordPress. So if you're using a different CMS, you could use editors like Make Stories or Newsroom AI, Visual Stories or AmpStore, or there's many others out there. And you can go to AmpDev to learn more about them.
Dr. Rita, I would like to know about categories. Which works best for web stories?
One common misconception about stories is that they're the same kind of social stories that you might have been creating for other walled garden platforms. And what we want for web stories is more editorial content that stands the test of time, that is evergreen. So that would be things like lifestyle news, food and drink coverage, like a recipe, or a travel guide, stuff like that. I think lifestyle categories in particular work really well. Sports works well, travel. I encourage you to experiment with the format, but make sure that it's editorial.
So our next question comes from Glenn, and he actually asks several questions, but we're going to answer the first one. Best practices for creating, shooting video for web stories, size, format, etc.
Great question. The first thing you want to make sure is that your video is vertical if you primarily want your stories to appear on mobile devices. Make sure that your crop factor is already mobile. You can, of course, in most editors, drag in a 16:9 video and then manually display it at the vertical resolution, but then you're not saving any bytes and you have a lot of extra bytes that get delivered to the end device. Make sure that it's already cropped to vertical resolution. Now, the second thing is that you should really watch out for what codec you use. Make sure you use ideally H.264 for a codec that works on Android and on iPhone devices. A resolution that is ideally not higher than 4K because otherwise it breaks down too. And make sure you don't use an exotic profile as well. So make sure it's baseline or main with a decent compression rate. Those videos that you create should probably be in the 2 megabyte to 5 megabyte range per clip as opposed to 100 megabyte.
Does Google crawl written content on web stories?
Yes, the answer is yes. If there's text in the web stories, we will crawl it. Now, the important thing is that this text should not be burned into the images or the background video. So make sure that it is an actual HTML element, a text element on top. That's the only real requirement. And also make sure that if you use a lot of videos and you use a lot of images, that you use the alt text and title attributes to make sure you describe your images and video. That is a general good SEO practice that helps us crawl your content.
What's the best way to serve this new URL? From a subdomain or a folder within a domain? Thanks.
Great question. A lot of people assume that you have to serve stories with stories in the title or something, right? Where you have like example.com/story/something or example.com/story1.html. That's not actually true. You don't have to do any of that. Just give your stories the same good SEO titles that you would otherwise give your web pages, since they're really just web pages under the hood. If it's about travel to Paris, then you just call it example.com/travel_to_paris.html or something like that. Make sure you always give it a descriptive title the same way you would with a web page.
And now, Paul, we're coming to an end. We have our final question for today. And this question comes from Beto. To appear in desktop Google search result, is it mandatory to add support for landscape displays?
Actually, no, you don't need to support landscape. Of course, we would like you to, because that will make the experience much better for desktop users. However, stories have a desktop mode. If you open a mobile story on desktop, you get this 3-pane view of a story, which allows you to easily tap through it anyway. Even just mobile stories will show on desktop search results.
Thank you, Paul, for answering all these questions. I'm sure the community is so happy to hear from you.
Yeah, well, thanks for sending them over. And if you have more questions, make sure you ask us more on our Google Web Creators Twitter account or Instagram account. Add them to the comments below on any of our videos. And keep them coming, because we'll have another episode as soon as our question bucket fills up again. Thank you, and onwards.